Welcome, everybody, to the Breakaway USA podcast. This is the fourth episode. We are going to be talking about Israel for the most part. Fabian's going to introduce some topics and kind of go for the macro perspective in terms of what governments' reactions are to this and how they see this in terms of power dynamics. Gentry's going to go over the day of Jihad, which supposedly is tomorrow. Tomorrow is October 13th, and I'm going to go through the history a little bit. So, Fabian, you want to start us off?
Welcome, everyone. And you're in for an incredibly insightful episode because something that just happened a few days ago, it has wide-ranging implications for not only us in America, but the entire world. And it was a massive attack by Hamas on Israel. If you haven't heard of it, you might be living under a rock, but it's everywhere right now. And a lot of people are already taking sides. You know, it's like we've been conditioned to take sides. COVID or not COVID, vaccine, no vaccine, Ukraine, Russia. This is just another one of those. And but it's not that simple because every time something happens, but this big, I always refrain from taking any action or making my mind until I've really done my research. And with something like this, being that Hamas was able to perpetrate this massive attack with I'm told 5,000 missiles, bulldozers. They had paragliders come in over the border. They used drones to disable lookout points. They cut holes inside of the fences. They slaughtered people at a festival. They took over. It's just all these things that the most guarded border in the entire world should never have happened. I keep hearing this, like, things failed. We heard about this in Hawaii. Oh, the sirens failed, and all these fail-safe mechanisms just failed, and we're supposed to just believe this. So, from my perspective, what I see is a collusion between different governments, and it's sad to even think like this. And I said, my video I posted that I hope I'm wrong, but I doubt it because this entire series of events that's happening, it's not just like it just sparked off and no one knew about it, which is something that's essentially impossible now. Literally, nothing can get done in the world without at least somebody knowing about it. And if they said they didn't, they're probably lying for a reason. But I think it's really important to understand exactly what's happening and why, and then we can go into more of the macro aspect. And I know, Mike, you're very tuned in as to the details of what exactly happened. Maybe you want to fill us in on that for all the listeners.
So, the history in the region is obviously complicated. The events of the day have been well documented, and you can see them everywhere. It's horrific. Like Fabian has said, it's hard to, or we should not be picking sides. At the end of the day, we're on the side of humanity. We're on the side of people. We're on the side of peace. We're on the side of not killing civilians. Ultimately, though, we have to recognize horrific acts when they occur. And something that's troubling to me is that people are so taken by these narratives that when they see elderly people and women and children being killed, raped, taken hostages, and their first reaction is a caveat of, well, they had it coming to a certain extent, it's very troubling. Like anybody who is, let's say, pro-Israel, if the state of Israel were to perpetrate any kind of actions like this, these actions would be completely condemned. So it's very hard for me to see how there's any way of justifying this. You're justifying a small genocide. So beyond these actions of the day that are horrific, we have to start to break down what the underlying story is, the narrative, the arguments on each side, and we have to look at what the region looked like beyond the last 20, 30, 50 years, even back beyond 100 years, right? The problem is a lot of people look at these things without context and as if the past didn't happen. So let's look back to even all the way back to the Roman time in I believe it was 150 AD. The Jews revolted against Rome that was in control of this region. They controlled the entire region, right? The Jews revolted, and then the Romans wanted to disassociate the Jews with this region, and they called the region Palestina. So the term itself, Palestine, comes from a Roman language. So it's not something that was self-appointed by Palestinians. And so the history of the people that live in that region that are known today as Palestinians, that call themselves Palestinians, the reality is that there were a lot of people in that region. They were, and more importantly, that region was not a carved out state on a map. That region that is known today as Israel and Palestine was inhabited by Bedouin Palestinians, Arabic Palestinians, Jewish Palestinians, excuse me. But so the term Palestinian only started being used for people that self-identified as that in the 1960s, following the 1967 war that happened. And so there's two particular wars that happened. There's the 1948 revolt that happened where the British Empire controlled the region following World War II and following World War One. A lot of people talk about the Balfour Declaration, which we won't talk about right now. But so there was the 1948 revolt, the Arab revolt, not the Palestinian revolt. So the Arab revolt took place in 1948, and the solution after the fact, the UN decided that a way for there to be peace in that area is to have two states, a state for Jews and a state for Arabs, the native Arabs of that region. I'm not going to continue too far on this because there's plenty of videos that you can go and watch to learn more about the history. But the reality is that the idea of a Palestinian state is a very young idea, and it's not, as some people are saying, thousands of years old. It's the whole narrative around the idea that Palestine is being occupied is very twisted. Let's say, following the 1948 revolt, they decided to have a two-state solution, and they carved out two areas, which don't look like they look today. But the Israelis, or the Jewish people, accepted this, and the Arabs of that region did not. The Arabs of this region rejected this division of the state in 1948, and since then, the Arabs of the region have essentially proclaimed war against this state of Israel, which was founded in 1948. And the clear and explicit goal of the Arabs of the region, of Hamas, which is the terrorist group that functions out of the Gaza Strip, is to annihilate Israel and to kill all Jews, which is, Hamas is clearly a terrorist organization, right? So a little bit more of the history is 1967, there was a 6-day war where Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, I believe Lebanon as well, all attempted to invade Israel and take over Israel. Israel actually won that war. They pushed back. They took over all of the West Bank. They took over the Gaza Strip. They took over all of the Sinai Peninsula, which is where Egypt, a huge part of Egypt. So following the 1967 war, there was a peace agreement between Jordan and Israel and Egypt and Israel. And Israel gave back the land to Egypt and gave back the land, the West Bank, to Jordan in exchange for peace. So this was their peace compromise, right? And this is an ongoing theme with the Israelis that want to live in that area, is they're constantly trying to find compromises and have peace in the area. And the thing is that the Hamas that functions out of the Gaza Strip, and even Hezbollah in the north that functions out of the south of Lebanon, they're both funded by Iran. And Iran has a clear mandate to annihilate Israel and get Israel out of the region and also kill Jews. Now, the history of the conflict between Muslims and Jews is a more complicated one, and it's a very tribal and primitive, in some ways, conflict. I don't understand it. I don't think we will ever understand it. It's just ingrained in the Muslim tradition. The Jews, I don't think they look favorably upon Muslims, but there's no clear statement that Jews want to annihilate Muslims. So there's one side that is clearly radicalized and clearly violent. Now, we'll get into this as well as you talk about the day of Jihad, Gentry. From what I understand, every attack that Israel has had on the Gaza Strip or the West Bank is in response to an attack that Hamas is firing missiles into Israel, right? And Hamas, we know, on a regular basis are firing rockets into Israel, and they have the Iron Dome that shoots them down. Some of them get by. So they're constantly firing rockets. And something that Hamas does that is indefensible and is against kind of the Geneva Convention and the rules of war internationally, is they will fire missiles from hospitals, from the top of schools, from densely populated areas. And then Israel has to take down these locations where they have their rockets set up, But the thing that Israel does is they will warn people and they will put off sirens. They will call people in the area and tell them to evacuate this building. We're taking down this building. So Israel's response is always to annihilate a threat, annihilate an attack that is unprovoked. The provocation that they claim is that Israel's occupying their land, is that they're being oppressed. This is it reminds me a lot of victimhood mentality and victimhood narratives in the West. But so we can get to that at another time. But so that's the general history. And we're going to have to talk about the responses that people are having, because we're seeing it everywhere on YouTube and Facebook and Instagram on the comments. And it's very troubling to see that so many people are taken by a certain narrative.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why again, it points to this was preconceived. There was a plan. There was a plan to this all didn't just happen randomly where we have all these people supporting Palestine. Like there was something already in place. There was in Michigan, I think, Dearborn, Michigan. I might be mistaken about the city, but there was this massive theater that was full. The day it happened, it was full of Palestinian pro-Palestinian people. And the first thought I have is, how do you rent out a theater or get time in a theater like that quick and then assemble all these people with all these flags to then go and have the rally and then you stream it online? Like I can barely figure out what I'm going to have for dinner. But if you're telling me within 4 hours of this attack happening, where I'm still learning,
Right
facts,
after,
it was the same. Yeah, I believe it was the same day. It was in Michigan. There was this theater full of people. Like, how did they book that out? Like,
like it could have been known within the Palestinian community. But what I think the more important thing too is, well, I mean, it's just very telling. But the more important thing is the IDF, the CIA, like all of these intelligence agencies that are constantly, spying on everybody. They just fell asleep at the wheel. To me, it just seems like in 9/11 fashion, which let's not get into 9/11, but it seems like it's something that was, or Pearl Harbor, that was allowed to happen for many different reasons that you have broken down, Fabian, in your videos.
So my take on Hamas is they war gamed this whole scenario out. They needed a attack that was going to warrant a much larger attack, and they kind of know Israel's MO, right? Like everyone kind of knows Israel's MO. They're going to neutralize a threat, and so they war gamed it out, and then all the PR or the propaganda, whatever you want to call it, coming out of the Middle East is that Israel. I mean, they dominated the Gaza Strip. I posted a video about it
Oh, they
a
leveled
little
it.
bit
Yeah.
ago. Yeah, they essentially leveled it. You're right, they did warn people to get out, but I think they war gamed it out to make Israel look bad.
Yeah, for
Even
sure.
though it was, I mean,
well,
like in my view, it was a
But
very
they're
warranted
essentially
response.
They're essentially sacrificing their own people, which is crazy.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. Well, it's Hamas.
Like,
right?
there's going to be a
So
response.
right. Like Hamas was basically putting like the Gaza Strip in its crosshairs. Like they don't necessarily have any regard for those people, which is sad. And that definitely shapes my view of what's happening. But the whole thing is sad. It's unbelievably sad.
What I can't figure out is if I'm Hamas and Iran comes to me and says, "Hey, look, we're going to train you to do this massive attack," and I'm a leader in Hamas, I clearly know what's going to happen as soon as it comes out, or rather, as soon as my attack is over. It's like it's like chess. Now it's their turn. But they are so drastically overpowered compared to Hamas. I mean, this is not a war like we have in Ukraine, where you have artillery versus artillery, where you have airplanes versus airplanes, where you have all these
Doesn't compare.
drones attacks. This is fairly small caliber weaponry that's being used. So I'm trying to think, if I'm Hamas, what do I get out of this? Okay, let's say, sure, I do a big attack, and it's the biggest one in however
Since
long.
the Holocaust, it's the most Jews killed in a weekend or week or day
Wow.
since the Holocaust.
So as far as legacy, if that's what I'm after, okay.
And sorry, excuse me, sorry. Killed is one thing, but slaughtered and taken hostage and mutilated and people are saying this baby story is fake. Even if that's fake, there's videos of them trying to behead people that are still alive with a hatchet. Like, and you're seeing them carry the bodies of people that are still alive, and they're broken. Their bodies are they're still alive. Like, it's really
Yeah. No,
disturbing,
it's
and it's war crimes by any standard, right? I saw a spokesperson for Hamas being interviewed, and the interviewer was saying, "Well, how can you justify killing these civilians?" And he said, "Well, there's no civilians that have been reported definitively to have been killed." And the guy's like, "What are you talking about? There's videos. We know, you know." And he's like, "No, no, no, no. I don't see the people that are occupying this territory, these oppressors, as civilians." So that's how they just start. Like, it's changing of words and changing of definitions. It's the same thing that happens in the West here, with all this LGBT stuff. It's changing the foundation, changing the basic meaning of words to suit your narrative.
Yeah, so
Mm.
and you're right, and the left does it, and Russia does it, Ukraine does it. It's just the MO
Everybody
of
does.
war. It's propaganda. But I just don't understand what the benefit of Hamas is. What do you get out of it? You're leveled, right? You have unless you've been promised something that no one knows about from who knows who. Then
Yeah.
what's your justification?
It's galvanizing support, I think, actually, ultimately. That's the most thing. It's galvanizing support from the Arab world and the Muslim world particularly.
But your home is destroyed. I mean, it's leveled. So
It's
what
not their home.
promise
They're
could they have
a terrorist
given you?
group. They're a terrorist group, man. They're people, the people that they're supposed to, because Hamas is an elected government. Hamas was elected in 2005. It's their government. Their government is a terrorist organization. Like, there's no beating around the bush. Hamas is a terrorist organization. Their modus operandi, their MO, is to kill Jews. It's like written in their constitution, is to kill Jews and eradicate Israel.
So the word Hamas, if you go back to the Hebrew, it actually means violence. So that is very in line with what you're saying. I think one of the things that they potentially get out of this is World War III. And I don't necessarily want to hop to that, just because I think we're all fascinated with a decline because we've been programmed by all these apocalyptic movies. But
Right.
I mean, that's kind of what we're looking at. Like, if you war game it out, someone's going to come to the Gaza Strip's aid, right? Maybe Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, somebody, and then that is going to trigger all these allies to, hop in. The US is actually moving a lot of ships over to that area right now, hopefully as a deterrent, but they're also still over there. So, I mean, if you play it out and, Donald Trump doesn't get in and there's no peace, then
It's
there's
one
going to
chess
be a
move
huge
away
war.
from World War III. Yeah, it's one
Yeah.
move away.
Well, to me, I think there's many different options because it's a moving situation. You can war game it out, but there's always, like Mike Tyson says, everyone has a plan to get punched in the face. So I don't know. I assume that they have plans in place. Plan A would be, if we have enough public support for Palestine, then maybe we'll do this. And if support shifts to Israel, then we'll do this. So at the end of the day, we're always chasing to try to figure out what they've been planning for years or decades or who knows how long. So they always have the upper hand because they're the ones pushing this narrative, and we're just trying to figure out exactly, put the pieces together, and then tell people about it. And by that time, hopefully it's not long. It's not too far from what the situation is now, because understanding the past when the present has moved forward so drastically is not really of a big help.
Yeah. Well, it seems like they are counting on the fact that we are going to react to this, right? It seems like they're very proactive, even with the day of Jihad that's supposedly happening tomorrow. I don't know if you guys saw this, but the founder of Hamas, his name is Khalid Mashal. He calls for the day of Jihad on Friday the 13th. I posted the video on my Twitter, my X. By the way, that video has been wiped from the internet. I had to dig and dig and dig and get a screen grab to record it. Censorship is crazy on this one. But essentially, he's calling for now. There's some that say he's calling for a localized jihad, so just basically all of the countries around Israel just say, "Hey, join in this holy war." But some people are saying that it's going to be a global day of jihad, right? And that he's actually asking for
Or any
all the
sleeper
Muslims.
cells.
Right, right. All the sleeper cells, which the question is, are there sleeper cells in all these countries? Are there sleeper cells in America? It's how many, right? And so there's been a lot of cities that have been put on alerts. The mayor of New York said, "Hey, this could be very real. Let's look at this." DC is pretty worried about it too. I've been hearing rumors about that. Greg Abbott hasn't necessarily done us a lot of favors by shipping all these immigrants to these sanctuary cities, which I believe is going to be where this whole thing is going to go down. So if you think about like Chicago and New York and Seattle, even Portland, LA, San Francisco. There's a bunch of sanctuary cities in Michigan. I think Dearborn actually, Michigan is like the biggest Muslim population per capita, right? So there's a whole bunch of things that point to, this potentially could be a really, really big deal. And I'm hoping I'm wrong. I'm really hoping I'm wrong, but there's that quote. It's like, prepare for the worst, but hope for the best.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And that could very well be the case. As far as them waiting for that war cry from YouTube, I would think that they'd have another way to get to the sleeper cells and say, hey, all right, this is the day it's going to happen. The other thing is, from that video at the very end, he says, he says something like, most importantly, make sure you like donate essentially to us. And I heard that the guy lives in a mansion in Qatar, because I guess he lost an arm and a leg from a strike from an Israeli missile. So he lives in Qatar at this massive house, and he's asking for money. I'm like, here we go again. The rich people trying to get, the subservient people to do all their dirty work.
Oh, here's another thing. And this is a theory, right? So I don't know if this is true or not, but Black Lives Matter in LA and Chicago both posted supports for the Palestinians, but they posted like kind of weird cryptic things. So they're actually in support of Hamas, right? And so here's my theory. It's unsubstantiated, but I'm just trying to connect the dots. If there were to be a day of jihad, they'll probably use BLM's network and get the word out and organize people, kind of like what you were saying with the theater in Michigan, where it was already planned out. At least it seemed like it was already planned out. If we go back to 2020 and we remember what happened after George Floyd, every city rioted the same weekend. The same weekend.
It was organized. Yeah.
Yeah. I was in Phoenix at the time. We were driving back from North Arizona, and we literally had to take like this roundabout way to get back to our Airbnb, because we literally saw like the lines of like the SWAT and like their guards, plus all the people who were like throwing like, was those like
Molotovs or something?
Yeah, Molotov grenades. It was
Molotov cocktails,
yeah, it was insane. So that's a theory that this day of jihad could potentially be distributed through the BLM network.
And the BLM network is, much bigger than BLM, like all of that money that was donated to BLM. Do you guys know where most of it wound up?
It's an equity in mansions.
Yeah, well, that's part of it for sure. They just cashed out. But I believe a lot of it went to the DNC through back doors, like $11 billion. Billion. A lot of money was donated to this George Floyd thing. I have to verify that, so don't quote me on it. But I remember.
Well, I mean, look, I believe it because
I made a post about it.
Because that's what they used. Sam Bankman-Fried, whatever his name is.
Yeah.
That's essentially what they did. They're like, hey, look, we're gonna allow you to do this, but you got to funnel a bunch of money up here.
But so what happened was that all of these chapters of BLM in all of these cities, they were like, where's this money? We haven't gotten any money. And so they reported getting $11 billion, and where did it go? So none of the small chapters got it. It's the leaders that are Marxists that bought mansions with it, and then it all got funneled to the DNC as well. It's a big scheme.
One of the things I saw that from that BLM post, one of the most despicable images that I saw was on that BLM post, where they put the picture of the paraglider on there, and it says, "We support Palestine." And a lot of people don't understand what that was. So the way that they attacked was they sent paragliders over the fence in to Israel to start attacking and killing people. So that imagery was very aggressive. It was very, I mean, honestly, I couldn't believe that they did it. When someone does something that overt,
You're supporting mass murder. Like, what is going on, guys? What is wrong with people?
two things: either they're very stupid and don't understand optics, which I highly doubt. The other is that they got the okay to do it. So if someone's okaying that, they must feel comfortable at this point putting that out. Just like when Klaus Schwab is starting to say these really crazy stuff that everyone called conspiracies a few years ago. To me, I'm saying if he feels that comfortable saying this stuff now, then what does he have behind him protecting him for him to say this?
So on that note, if we're talking about war, right, and we're talking about military against military, Ukraine, Russia, they're trying to avoid touching any civilians in this war. That's not what happened here. They explicitly, essentially had a day of terror. That like, it's like 9/11. It's like applauding 9/11. You're dealing with a group of people that just decided to, like, this is not a commentary on all Palestinians. This is not a commentary on, peaceful people that just want to live in the Gaza Strip. This is a commentary on Hamas, which is a terrorist group that slaughtered civilians. If you can't, like, point blank, point final in French, just condemn all of these actions without giving it a caveat of, well, Israel's oppressing, and which you can't even substantiate, forget about whether that's right or wrong. You have to point blank condemn these. Like, I don't understand how people, and these people that are applauding this don't even know the history at all.
I think it comes from, especially in America, we saw one of the Congress ladies where she wouldn't condemn the beheading of babies and the killing of civilians. She kept walking. They asked her like 10 times in a row following her.
Ilhan Omar?
No, another one that has the LGBTQ whatever
Talib?
flag and the Palestinian flag.
Terrorists have cut off babies' heads and burned children alive. Do you support Israel's rights to defend themselves against this brutality?
We're just going to go through here.
You can't comment about Hamas terrorists chopping off babies' heads. Do you condone what Hamas has done, chopping off babies' heads, burning children alive, raping women in the street? You have no comment about children's heads being chopped off? Congressman, why do you have the Palestinian flag outside your office if you do not condone what Hamas terrorists have done to Israel? Do Israeli lives not matter to you?
But to me, what this signals is that we clearly know what BLM wants, right? They want decolonization. And what that means is violence, right? That means killing of white people and taking over, breaking down the system, et cetera. We know what critical race theory says. We know what they stand for. And we know what some of the leaders have said and posted and have been fired for because in the way that they wrote it. But the true colors show. So if decolonization, the strong, rich, white Israelis versus the poor, brown Palestinians, if that's the narrative that they want to push and the optics, it matches perfectly with this BLM decolonization type thing, where they literally said, Gentry, in that post, like the black people have a lot in common with them. We understand their plight, etc. So if you want to bring that here, that's a perfect vehicle for the left to indoctrinate their people even deeper and to saying, okay, look, now you've been indoctrinated. Now prepare for war.
Well, these are people that truly think that black people are oppressed in America. Like the last president or the second last president of a country was black. Like what? Like you? So there's a you guys know who Booker T. Washington is? Have you heard of him? So he's a black he's a black thinker from the 1800s. He was a slave. He was emancipated. He went off and started schools in Tuskegee, Alabama. And so he was a very influential figure in Black history, but he's not spoken about a lot on the left. But so one quote that he has is that there is a whole class of Black people. He says Negroes, but I mean, anyways, so that's how they used to refer to themselves. There's a whole class of Black people that make a living on keeping the narrative that Black people are oppressed alive. So there's these, what we call them today is race hustlers, like Jesse Jackson and what's that other guy, and BLM today, that literally make their living on keeping the plight of the oppressed Black person and this narrative of slavery that which that is racist in itself. The idea that Black people are not as smart as everybody else because a couple generations ago they were enslaved. Most cultures, most nationalities, most people of the world had people that were enslaved. The Native Americans enslaved other Native Americans. All throughout Africa, this was just a reality of the world. And to say that Black people are not as competent today because of slavery is racist in itself. You're saying that Black people are not as smart as other colored people. Because ultimately, from one generation to the next, if you have the education necessary to build up your knowledge and your critical thinking capacity, if you're white, brown, Asian, it doesn't matter. So this is the idea of nature versus nurture. But there's plenty of studies that have shown that Black kids that have grown up in, let's say, more affluent neighborhoods have gone on to be much smarter than white kids in those neighborhoods. There's no, if you push this narrative or this idea that Black people are oppressed, and because of that they need affirmative action, you're saying that Black people aren't as smart. Anyways, I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole. Sorry that I did to begin with.
No, there's no question that we live in one of the greatest countries in the world, that you can pull yourself up from your bootstraps. The other thing, though, is that you have the liberty and the freedom to be as dumb as you want. I don't know if you guys have seen the meme of the queers for Palestine. Have you guys seen
that's
that?
Classic.
Like chicken for KFC.
Yeah,
exactly,
right.
exactly. So I actually started a GoFundMe, and I said, "Hey, let's send the queers to Palestine, and let's see if we can raise some money to actually send one of these guys over." I actually did. It's on my Twitter. It's on my X, and I just think it's so dumb. I showed my dad the meme, and he was shocked at the stupidity of these people. I think that the statistic is 93% of the Middle East, not just one country, the Middle East does not tolerate queer, gay, LGBTQ, alphabet people at all. And
alphabet people, the LMNOP community.
Right. No, seriously. But like,
not only do they not tolerate, they kill them.
Exactly. Can you imagine if 93% of the US agreed on something? Like, that's unheard of. And it's like we do live in the greatest country of all time because you have the freedom to be as dumb as you want.
Yeah, this really points to something that already happened in China under Mao, which is the Red Guards. And I talk about this a lot, where Mao needed this radical young group of people that he can easily indoctrinate to go and cause chaos, that he can come in, remove Chiang Kai-shek, and then take power back. So he started the Red Guards, which was all the young people, and he essentially sent them on a mission to go find anyone who wasn't a true believer of Mao communism and out them. And he gave them permission to hit them with sticks and things like that, and turned a blind eye when they committed murder, etc. And then they got too powerful. So then he had the PLA, the army, essentially slaughter a lot of the Red Guards to shut them up. And then he sent 16 to 18 million of them in the next few years to the countryside to go work, to go cast off
concentration camps, essentially.
Exactly. So this is exactly what this leftist ideology is doing to the LGBTQ alphabet people. They are
using
them. And then when they're done being used and they've caused all this chaos, they're going to be too radical and they're going to be casted off. So there's no difference from what Mao did to what it's happening now. It's history repeats itself. But instead of using Mao used different classes. Like if you were a red class, you were good. If you were a black class, you were bad, meaning you were an elite. And elite could mean that you had 2 pots in your house instead of one. Like, why do you need that much, those many pots to cook? So it's just incredible. And we've been red washed in America, which means that we learned very little about communism and about what actually happened. So as a young kid, they're essentially getting mobilized by the same ideas that Mao used on young people without realizing that this already happened. We tried this and look what happened. We had so many people die. So it's sad to see this happening over again, but I think education
and live in absolute poverty.
Exactly.
The whole country. But sorry, continue.
No, yeah, that was the end of my point, but it's just, I see the same thing happening with, LGBTQ, and no one's telling them you're being used. And when you were done serving your purpose, you will be discarded. Because look at China. China they don't have any LGBTQ, no pride, but because they've already passed that, they already have absolute control in one man. They would have a communist state. Communism doesn't want people like LGBTQ people stirring up conflict. They want everyone to be the exact same, not someone being, better than the other. At least that's the idea.
Mm-hmm. I think there's probably a solution that's coming forth right now, because I think one of the things that creates these useful idiots is that they're lied to, right? And it's one side or the other.
From a very young age.
From a very young age. But Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Is running for president as an independent. He announced that this last week. And I think that he's got a huge potential to, number one, rally a whole bunch of new voters, but also number two, tell people the truth in a way that people will actually listen. Obviously, we know that there's Trump derangement syndrome, so they're not going to listen to him. But what do you guys think about this RFK Jr. running for president?
2 things. Number one, Sean Hannity just called him out, I believe yesterday. He tweeted in 2018 that right after the Parkland shooting, that the NRA should be labeled a terrorist organization. And in the video, Sean Hannity says, "Do you still stand by those words? Do you still consider us?" And he tried to give an answer. He's like, "But that's not what I asked you about the Second Amendment. I asked you, are we still a terrorist organization, or the NRA rather?" And he said, "No." That thing. The other thing is that he is for.
But what did he say about that comment?
He basically said that he doesn't believe that they're a terrorist organization anymore.
But he believed it then. Okay.
That's what he tweeted. And he said, and he said, "I don't even remember tweeting that, but if I did, I don't anymore." So the second thing is that he supports second and third trimester abortions. So that's the other thing. And
are you sure about that?
Yeah, he even said it. So that's the other point, that he's not going to win over any conservatives with those 2 things. That's for sure.
Well, that might be a good thing, and he might just take Democrat votes.
That's a good point.
But he's gonna get all of the Democrat votes of people that are alive. Biden will get all the dead people that are going to vote, and all of the mass mail-in ballots that are just printed 5 times, and they're going to stop the accounting at midnight to see how much they need.
Well, you know what I hope happens this time? I know last time I saw it happen, where there were literally citizens outside of these voting the centers where they count them.
But it has to happen at every single place.
It has to happen at every single, with the camera streaming it, so that other people can download the images and the footage and keep it around and put it in, like, maybe put it on the blockchain, which you can do now.
Yeah.
So it lives forever.
Well, I think the voting system should be on the blockchain or paper in person with an ID. We do in Canada. Canada has its problems, but one thing that we do is in-person voting with an ID, with a registered driver's license. You can't vote in Canada. There's no mail-in ballots. I mean, they're probably going to start to implement that now that Trudeau is. If there was another election, Trudeau the floor would be wiped with him. Everybody that's even remotely liberal. Actually, there are a lot of liberals that are still peddling that nonsense. But the one thing that Canada does is that they do in-person voting with IDs. The U.S. it's clear, if you want to do mail-in voting, mass mail-in voting, you want to try to cheat in the election. There's no question.
So I think RFK Jr. though, he is very popular with the anti-vax community because of how hard he's gone after the vaccines, and even that book, The Real Anthony Fauci. So I think there
Yeah.
could be quite a few people who are pretty upset at Trump for not coming out and saying I was wrong about it, which if he did that, he'd win in a landslide, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think there is a few people who are going to, from the Republican side, vote for RFK Jr. But I think you're right. The abortion issue is a lot bigger than people realize on the right. So he's not going to get a lot of those. He's going to take a lot of the center left, which I think is going to be a good thing because whoever runs is going to have a heck of a hard time running against him, because that's essentially who they're going to be running against, because they're going to take away all of their own votes.
And center left are the people who really don't want to vote for Biden in this crazy leftist administration. So they're the ones most apt to, switch over. And now the other thing is, I think if RFK comes out and says, I'm wrong about the Second Amendment, I'm sorry, guys. He already said that he doesn't think that way anymore. But if he apologized for it, that's one thing. The abortion thing, that's a whole other, you can't really get over that. But here's one thing that I think is going to really make a difference in the whole Second Amendment NRA terrorist thing is if we do have this jihad tomorrow on Friday the 13th, and there are Americans who protect themselves with guns, and if there are Americans who are conservative who defend other Americans who happen to be very liberal from being killed, what is going to happen then? You might have this this massive coming together, saying, hey, I just saved your life. Maybe you want to rethink the Second Amendment. So there's so many ways that this can play out tomorrow, even if it's just one instance. It's all it takes, right? I mean, we know cameras are everywhere. So it's going to be very interesting.
There's American hostages that Hamas took.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So how is that resolved? How does that...
Oh,
Like,
we
is
have
that-
special forces already there.
Well, so there's a congressman from Florida. I think his name's Corey Mills or Caleb Mills. Have you heard about this story? He's actually over there. He chartered some jets. He got some like private security type like militia people, and he's gone over and evacuated a lot of these Americans that are over there. I don't know if he's gotten the hostages, but I think he's like gotten like 30 people out of.
About that.
It's insane.
Yeah.
I was watching this unfold because I didn't really know who he was until he started trending, and I was like, "Who is this guy?"
And apparently
He's a
he did the
freaking
same
hero.
thing in Afghanistan, from what I read.
No
I haven't
way.
verified it, but
That's insane.
the comments were saying that's what I call a servant of the people. But as far as the hostages, they're being they have special forces over there, Navy SEAL type, ready to try to get them out. Which, I mean, geez, the things that those guys do, it's just insane. Like,
So I
forces?
have an update. It's 77 Americans from Afghanistan in 2021 and Israel in 2023 today, and it's because Biden doesn't do anything. That's essentially what he's saying. This guy's, I mean, it's a campaign
epic,
ploy,
yeah.
but I'm not mad about it.
yeah, exactly. But I'm
Like,
cool with that.
seriously.
Yeah.
Wow, doing good things and using them as as a ploy for a campaign is not,
I'd rather
Not the
good
worst
thing,
thing,
right?
I'm all
Actually
for
doing
it.
good. Yeah.
So Fabian, you said this last podcast and you were talking about there being some kind of nuclear option for the Biden administration. And this is what has me thinking about them letting something like this happen, and him being a wartime president, and it being hard to unseat a wartime president. So when we spoke about it, we spoke kind of about Ukraine and where that could lead to, but we did not see this coming, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well-
And it's another way to divide conservatives, because you have conservatives who are, there's a really strong lobby of the Israeli arm in DC, and then you have people who are more patriotic America. So if
Don't send funds there.
exactly, or you just divide the support, and and the more division they can sow, the better for them. So I see this as, I always try to think of like, what are the possibilities from this? What are the ramifications that could happen?
Like,
And
who has something to gain?
exactly. And it's so complex, but you try to put the pieces together as well as you can. And to me, it's just the people in power want to stay in power. The people not in power want to get power back. That's the foundation of the game. And the people at the bottom, or 99.9% of humanity are the losers, and we're watching this game happen. It's literally a Game
Or
of
just-
Thrones. It's a real life Game of
We're
Thrones.
we're cannon fodder. They don't care. They don't care. I mean, they actually want millions, if not billions, of people to get off this planet because we're ruining the planet, right?
Yeah. Every war is a banker's war. The bankers, the military industrial complex, they just always win.
Yeah.
If you go back to the Napoleonic Wars, right? I think it was the Bank of England, but they decided to fund both sides of the war. And they found out that that was a really good way to make a ton of money and basically side with whoever's winning.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
they
hedge
don't
your
care.
bet.
That's
You hedge your
yeah.
bet.
And so
They're
yeah,
not ideologues. They want to make money. That's it, and they want power.
they are ideologues, and their idea is money.
You know,
Right,
something I was
yes.
listening
That's a
to,
good
I think
point.
like a historian, he was saying, if you were just a regular person, you lived under any kind of like a lordship or a kingdom, whatever, the only thing that the king or whoever was the ruler of that area had to tell you was, there are people from a different land who want to come here and kill you, your wives, and
Yeah.
your children.
So
You
we're
have to take
protecting
up
you.
arms. You have to come fight. And that's all they had to tell you. It was so easy because you can only travel so far on foot or on horse. Information took forever to get there. And you didn't meet people from other, towns and areas. You didn't understand. They could say that they have, dragons with them, and you would be like, oh crap, like we got to go fight. And now
Yeah, propaganda is not a new thing. It's just now it's just in a split second. Then it was, by horseback. The guy would come in and tell you a story about something and get you fired up.
exactly. And so now you can't tell people that, so-and-so is coming to kill you and they have magic powers, because clearly we know what everyone looks like on the earth, and no one has magic powers like that. There's no wizards. Now there might be what do they call them? Reptilian?
Reptilians.
Yeah.
Well, Area 51, I mean, who knows?
So now
Yeah.
they've taken that same concept and they just make it into propaganda, where they just twist a lie and say they're still coming to get you. Nothing's changed. They're over there. They're going to come here and take what's yours. So we have to fight them, and you have to come help me fight them, and you have to support me.
hmm
I'd like to make a quick comment on the foundation of the claim that Hamas and the Muslim world or the Arab world uses against Israel and claims that Israel is an oppressor, that the Gaza Strip is an open air prison. And that they're occupying the West Bank, and they have settlements in the West Bank and settlements. Well, there's no settlements in the Gaza Strip; they would all be annihilated. But in the West Bank, they're taking over more and more territory. So before 1967, all of the land that was owned by Jews in the territory that is now Israel was bought. And so people have a recourse with the Balfour Declaration. So the Balfour Declaration is basically the Rothschilds and Jews in the British Empire in the UK after World War I that got together and basically signed this thing saying that they want to create a Jewish state. And so what people are saying in commentaries on YouTube and Instagram when we post stuff is like, oh, look at the Balfour Declaration. It's like, so Jews have been oppressed since, Egypt. Jews have been oppressed everywhere they've been in the world. All you need to look at is the Holocaust, right? So the idea to make a Jewish state is not this ridiculous idea. And Ben Shapiro actually commented on it. He's like, this is exactly why they need a Jewish state. So there was Arabs and Jews in the area, and Jews were essentially, surrounded by Arabs that are hostile towards Jews. And without them having borders and without them having some kind of state that is protected, this Hamas thing would happen on a regular basis by their own admission, by their own constitution, right? So the idea that they're oppressed, all right, that the idea that Israel kills, women and children in the Gaza Strip, we already discussed this. It's that Hamas, none of Israel's attacks on Hamas or on Palestine are unprovoked. So that is, if I'm wrong there, someone please correct me. Second of all, the fact that they're occupied. This land is barren. It's a desert. It was a desert, and nobody wanted anything to do with this land. There was literally Bedouins living in the desert. And then as soon as there was this idea that there was going to be a two-state solution where you have Israel and Palestine was offered, or the Palestinian people, the Palestinian Arabs that lived in the area, were offered a state many times, and they always declined because the compromise they would have to make is to acknowledge that Israel can exist and acknowledge that the Jewish people can have a state. And they don't want to acknowledge that Israel that Israel belongs there at all, that Israel can even exist. They think that it should be wiped off the map and that should all be theirs. But so the important thing to look at here is people don't look at the context, the historical context, more than 50 to 100 years ago, right? All of history is tribal warfare. All of history is the redrawing of borders on maps. All of history is people taking over land and keeping it if they can defend it. This is not a new concept. They disregard human nature completely. They disregard the idea that we are tribal people that form communities and grow and then want to take over more land. These lines, the country of Jordan has only existed since the British, who controlled this territory, made Jordan, which was Transjordan beforehand, a country. The Palestinian people did not refer to themselves as Palestinian until 1967. This idea that Palestine has existed forever is first of all, it's nonsense. There's been Jews and Arabs in that land for the longest time. Egypt has controlled it. The Romans have controlled it. The Turks, the Ottoman Turks controlled it. The Caliphate, the Muslim Caliphate controlled it. It's like, who do we return it to? That's not how things work. Like by that logic, we should return Spain to Muslims because Spain was controlled by Muslims. By that logic, we should return, Ukraine to Russia because it was part of the logic is ridiculous. It's the same idea with Native Americans and the U.S., right? So there was appeasement and there was compromises made where Native Americans have their reserves, right? And that's a peaceful agreement. But this idea that America was native land and we stole their land, or in Canada that we stole their land, is silly. Land, they didn't even recognize that people can own land. They sold New York City for $30 because they're like, oh, we didn't even know that you can own land, right? So this idea that any territory belongs to anybody and it's theirs by right, by birthright, because of 100 years ago or 200 years ago or 500 years, 1,000 years, it's disregarding human nature and it's disregarding human history. So we have to get over this and start being straight up about these things and not play to these people's whims and their emotions about the idea that this belongs to this person and that to that person. It's the people who win wars redraw maps. That's just the way it is. Whether it should be like that, whether that's utopic or not, it is regardless. That's how the world works.
100%. So I actually have a biblical perspective on this, which is really interesting. If you go back to Genesis 1:28, it says, "Be fruitful and multiply, and take dominion of the earth." Right? And if you kind of dig deeper, it's like go into the earth, conquer it, create order out of chaos, and make it look really pretty, kind of like Adam's mandate for the Garden of Eden, right? He was supposed to be like a gardener and go create order out of chaos. And this idea of manifest destiny that you hit on is just brilliant. I think people have this worldview today that world peace is achievable, and I think it's a great goal to go towards, but you're missing the fact that there is real evil in this world, and evil does not stop itself, so it must be stopped. And the only way that you can get true peace is through war, or if you speak softly and carry a big stick, or in Trump's case, speak very loudly and have the whole U.S. military behind you, right? So this idea of world peace is this utopian idea. To be honest, it's really far-fetched. It ignores the idea of true evil, and it also ignores exactly what you're saying, the human experience of manifest destiny, conquer. I mean, to the conquerors go the spoils. Right.
Yeah.
And territorial ambition. Every country has territorial ambition to expand.
Right.
Yeah.
As much as they can control and protect.
Yeah. Two things to that point, Gentry, is number one, Americans have never, the Americans alive now have never dealt with a border dispute. In America, our borders, that it just is, right? This is where it ends.
They're drawn.
Most of the world is not like that. There's territory disputes. And I think one of the big disconnections that a lot of Americans have to this issue is that you've never really dealt with it. Just like you've never experienced or known anyone who's lived in a communist state. So you're going to support leftism in Palestine when you really don't know what the hell you're talking about. Is if you did, then you would change your tune. And the second point I forgot, but I think the first one just makes enough sense.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, so the reason why in America we haven't had to deal with border disputes is because our military is unbeatable and nobody would dare to threaten our borders.
We're
But
also technically friends with our neighbors. That goes a long way
right.
too. We don't have Canada. I'm not going to see Mike over there with the AK-47 trying to take over
Oh my
Buffalo, New
God.
York or something.
You think that it's hard to get a gun in California? Canada, they're trying to take away like the last remains of hunting weapons that we were allowed to have. To get a gun license, I mean, it would take you like a year and a half and cost you thousands of dollars to just get a license. Then you have to have your gun. You have to have a safe, which is fine, okay? Or you have to store it somewhere at a gun range. Anyways, that's a whole different story. But this idea of redrawing the map is not a new concept. The 1989, the Berlin Wall falls. All of Russia and all of Yugoslavia that was, and the Soviet Union, all of these get redrawn. They live in a hermetically sealed bubble where only the things that they have heard and feel emotionally are real. It's not how the world works. They think that everything is peace and love, and oh, this is our enemy today, so we need to bash whatever enemy the news tells us to bash. It's the same thing with every single topic and every single argument that the left has. They just disregard human nature. I mean, name a topic, whether it's transgenderism, like the idea that femininity and masculinity are social constructs is ridiculous. The idea that girls are more affectionate and more, or women and girls are more affectionate and more inclined to want to be in a job that is, you're more socially responsible and you have to deal nursing and PR and HR or whatever. And then men, being 98% of garbage men, of welders, of every hard job. These are biologically ingrained in our physical capabilities. Men are stronger than women on average and at the extremes. There are women that are stronger than men, fine. To deny these things is ridiculous, right? People that are feminists today will say, well, if I say men on average and at the extremes are stronger than women, do you agree with that? And a lot of people can't agree with that. And it's like, what? Okay, I can't have a conversation with you about anything if we can't agree that men biologically are stronger than women. It's just on average, right? Of course, there's women that are stronger than men. Of course, there are women that can kick men's asses. There's a spectrum of scrawny and weak to jacked and whatever. If you can't agree on basic things like this, how can we have a logical conversation? And how can you even maintain that, right? Like, think just for a second. Anyways, I'm done. So ultimately, the left just completely disregards human nature and history and historical context when they talk about anything. It's all emotions. But so that I think can wrap us up. We talked about a lot. We have plenty more to talk about. We can do it on the next one. Gentry, you want to close us off?
Yeah, that's great. So this has been episode 4 of the Breakaway USA podcast. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, share with a friend, follow us on all social platforms, Breakaway USA. Go join our email list as well. And thank you for listening.